Hello everyone, my name is Diaz. I'm a staff attorney at Vermont Legal Aid, and I wanted to welcome you to Legal Protections in School for Vermont's Homeless Students. Today we'll be discussing the McKinney-Vento Act and going over what homeless students' rights are in school, how they can access support services, and how they can access transportation, special ed, and what the eligibility criteria are. So quickly I'll go through today's agenda. Just to start out, I want to let you know that this PowerPoint is only for informational purposes. If you have questions specific to specific clients, it'd be best to contact me. My contact information will be at the end of the webinar. So we'll go through a little bit of background and context for the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. We'll discuss the eligibility criteria, as I mentioned. We'll talk about how schools can identify and their obligations to identify homeless students and enroll homeless students. And then the support services that are available around transportation, special education, and early education, as well as some local and national resources for further information. So before we get started, I just want to go through and find out who's attending this webinar. So we have a short, small poll we're going to do here. So if you'll click on one of the possible choices. I want to see if we have school employees, advocates, social workers, or other. I'll give you a few more seconds here. All right, so it looks like we have some social workers, a good number of family advocates, some school employees, and parents. Great, thank you for that. Okay, so let's get started. So first, getting into the background and context of why this is important, I want to talk about the causes of homelessness a bit. When we think about homelessness, we think about people who really can't afford to live independently. And a lot of the reasons are, similar reasons that people are homeless here in Vermont are similar across the nation. A lack of affordable housing, which makes sense. You think about the foreclosure crisis, low vacancy in the rental market, and uninhabitable dwellings. Many people can't afford to live in apartments locally and nationally. Also, just general economic hardship. People lose their jobs. People get into debt. People can't afford food, can't afford heat, can't afford normal subsistence level costs, and that makes it difficult for people to live independently. There's also health problems. People lack insurance and they can't afford the high cost of health care, so they go into debt because of that. Or, sometimes they do have substance addiction issues as well as mental health problems that prevent them from being able to cope with all that comes with living independently. Also, there are natural disasters such as floods. So we saw some of this with Tropical Storm Irene, as well as other disasters. You think about just fires and things that happen in the home that make it impossible for people to actually live in a house. Many family members also leave home because they're unsafe in their own homes. They have to women typically have to flee with their children and may not have the resources to live independently for a time. So they may go to a shelter, may go to a friend's house. And then finally, when we think about family loss, abuse, neglect, and family dysfunction, we're thinking specifically about unaccompanied homeless youth, which we'll discuss further in a few minutes. But typically, these are young kids who, maybe teenagers who decide they have to leave the home for one reason or another. Their parents are no longer around or available, or they are actually kicked out of their houses. So again, here are the short-term effects of homelessness. When we think about homelessness, we immediately think about instability for kids and youth. 3 to 6% of homeless children in Vermont live on the streets, in camps, or in cars. So they're clearly not able to, feel the stability that comes with living in a secure household. Also, food insecurity is a big problem for Vermont's young people and homeless people in general. 60% of homeless adults report inadequate food consumption. Homelessness for kids is highly correlated with health problems. 45% of homeless children are overweight and lack nutritional sustenance. Also, abuse can be typical for homeless children. Unfortunately, 2 to 3 times the national rate of children who are homeless end up in situations of abuse. Also typical of this is trauma from moving from place to place often. Kids are not able to cope as well with high mobility, and in education that leads to usually to educational failure. Moving during the school year from one school district to another results, studies have shown, in 4 to 6 months of lost learning. And this repeated trauma leads to behavioral problems, and we'll discuss some long-term effects here. Homeless children, studies have shown, are more likely to have mental health struggles, have to deal with behavioral cognitive disabilities. Many have end up with substance abuse disorders, and later in life can have risky sexual behaviors. Also, homeless children are more likely to end up in the foster care system, end up long-term in psychiatric treatment, substance abuse treatment, and jail, prison, or both. That would be, committing misdemeanors, ending up in jail, committing felonies, ending up in prison. And also, long-term, what we need to really think about is the high cost to the state. New York found that in order to help a chronically homeless person with the various long-term effects, such as mental health issues, substance abuse issues, imprisonment, costs vastly more than what it would have cost to house them, house their family when they were young, or house them when they became adults. So getting back to Vermont, what do we know about homeless kids in Vermont? We know that over 800 children are in Vermont shelters this year, or last year. We know that in 2011, 2012, which is the latest data that we have from the federal government and Vermont, that over 1,200 students were homeless. That was a 30% rise over the year before, and over a 50% rise from the year 2009. So clearly this is becoming more of a problem in the last few years in Vermont. Over 3,000 Vermonters were in shelter that year as well. Now, homeless families, for the purposes of education, are categorized a little bit differently than in other definitions under different regulations. So we'll be discussing some of these as the webinar goes forward. Of the homeless children in Vermont who are in our schools, 62% were doubled up. That means living with other relatives or friends. 8% were in shelters. 25% were living in hotels or motels, usually through the emergency assistance program. And 5% were unsheltered. That means living in cars, camps, or in unknown locations. And the unfortunate thing here is that many will go uncounted. It will be, it's difficult to make sure that we are counting everyone in school. Identification is a problem, and we'll talk about that soon. So let's talk about just quickly some barriers to education before we get to the act itself. What I found and what many find is that there's simply a lack of awareness among most people about the issues of homelessness and how they affect children. Children, it's difficult to find out that they're homeless, even though there is an obligation to identify homeless children in schools. Many people don't want to talk about it, which is completely understandable. Also, high mobility results in a lack of school stability and educational continuity. This means, when you're thinking about kids moving from place to place often, maybe every couple of months, maybe every 6 months, they're changing schools, they're changing social context, they're losing connection to people that they knew, and this can be difficult for kids. It makes it difficult to learn. It makes it difficult to continue, on with the course of study that they had. Schools are on all different timelines. Typically, these kids also have poor physical health and poor mental health. They are suffering from fatigue, and they may be hungry. This makes it very difficult to access education and to learn on a day-to-day basis. There also is some prejudice and misunderstanding of homeless families, what they're dealing with, what they're going through, and how we can best help their kids learn as well as everyone else. There's also, various enrollment requirements in public school and in early education programs where school records, health records, proof of residence have to be shown before a student can be asked to enroll in the program. And a lot of times, families that are highly mobile do not have access to those records. Families in these situations may also not have transportation available to them. They may not be able to access buses. They may not have a car, so they need assistance with that. And they may also not have school supplies for their kids. They may not have appropriate clothing, so there may be some hesitancy to go to school until those things can be secured. All right, so the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act is a federal law that sought to take down some of those barriers. The idea of the law was to, go through the points here, was to require schools to identify homeless children in their schools, allow students to stay in their school of origin, allow students to access the local area attendance school when they were homeless and had just moved to a new location, ensure that the school choice, whether it was the original school where the student was previously living or the residence area where they live now, that the choice between those two schools was based on the best interests of the student, require that transportation be provided by the school so that families that didn't have access to a car or other transportation options would have something provided to them, and require support and full participation in all classroom activities. And finally, the Act provides funding to schools to make sure that these services are available. Okay, so let's talk about who is eligible for McKinney-Vento services. And when we talk about, who's eligible, we're thinking about students, but there are a couple different categories of students. So you can think about children and youth. That's pretty self-explanatory. You can think about unaccompanied youth. That's children and youth who are on their own and not in the custody of a legal guardian. Or you can think about migratory children. This would be children whose parents migrate and are for seasonal employment reasons to agricultural work, dairy work, and for fishing. And they have to move to a different school district with their kids. And it is these three categories when they lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. Now we'll define this last phrase here on the PowerPoint. But before we do, I want to mention that in Vermont, some people have asked me about age restrictions. When is a child no longer a child? When is a student no longer covered by McKinney-Vento? And I would say that this depends on the state and educational circumstance of the child. So, for instance, special education students have access to school until age 22 under federal law. So a homeless child who is receiving special education services would be eligible for McKinney-Vento services until they were 22. And actually, Vermont, I haven't been able to locate whether there is an age limit that students have to graduate by. So, really anyone who hadn't graduated school or received high school equivalent graduation requirements equivalent to high school graduation is likely eligible for McKinney-Vento services. Okay, so back to what does it mean to have a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence? And first off, I want to make sure everyone understands that in order to qualify for McKinney-Vento services, you don't need to lack all three of these, a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. You only need to lack one of them. So you can lack a fixed residence, even if it is regular and adequate. You can lack an adequate residence, even if it is fixed and regular, and still qualify for McKinney-Vento services. So let's just go through quickly what these the definitions of these words are and what they mean so we get a deeper understanding. Fixed, we're thinking about, this is just Merriam's dictionary. Fixed means not subject to fluctuation or change. That means a residence is stationary and secure. So we're not thinking about cars, we're not thinking about campers, we're thinking about structures that are in the ground, of course. When we talk about what is a regular residence, we're thinking about something that's used on a nightly basis for sleeping, normal, standard, recurring at normal intervals. And finally, adequate. What we're talking about is sufficient to satisfy its purpose or to satisfy the law. So in the case of a residence, the residence would need to meet health and safety code and provide adequate space, privacy, security, lighting, bathroom facilities, and ventilation in order to qualify as adequate. And just some examples of homelessness that would be covered by McKinney-Vento, and some of these are specifically mentioned in the Act as examples, what could be included, but they're not exclusive. So there could be other examples, but these are just a few. We're thinking about doubled up families. You heard me mention this earlier. When we talk about being doubled up, we're talking about families that are sharing housing with other people due to economic hardship, safety concerns, disasters, or something similar to that. When we talk about emergency shelter, we're thinking about homeless and transitional shelters. We're also thinking about the emergency shelter program that Vermont uses and uses the motels for. Or if families are simply, paying for their own rooms in motels and hotels. Public and private places that are not meant for people to live in, so parks, under bridges, in the woods, bus and train stations, cars again. We're also thinking about the precariously housed. Precariously housed means people who live in residences that may have issues, habitability issues, so there may not be working heat, there may not be running water. Those people would also qualify as homeless under McKinney-Vento. We're also thinking about couch surfers, people who aren't sure, who may be living in a residence that would be adequate for the people there, but that the people who are trying to qualify for McKinney-Vento aren't sure how long they can stay. That would also qualify. The last two here, children awaiting foster care placement, so children who are in state custody but are not currently placed with a foster family, and youth without legal guardians. This would be either youth who are precariously housed and don't have a legal guardian, or are precariously housed with someone else who can't qualify as a legal guardian. All right, so just to go over some of the issues here, I want to ask a quick question and see where our level of understanding is. We'll have a few of these as we go forward. So the first question I want to ask everyone, to save money on heating costs for the winter, 8-year-old Jimmy and his parents moved from Lebanon, New Hampshire to White River Junction. They're now living in grandma's 2-bedroom house because they can't afford a security deposit to live on their own. Jimmy's family doesn't have any plans to move right now, and so the question is, which school can Jimmy attend? A, White River Junction, B, Lebanon, C, either school, D, neither school. I'll give you 60 seconds to answer here. All right, just a few more seconds. All right. So let's go through this together. Most of you got the answer right. The answer is C, either school, because this looks like a doubled up situation and the family is staying there because of economic hardship. But let's go through it and show how we can get to that answer. The first question you want to ask is, is this a child or youth? Is this an unaccompanied youth? Is this a migratory child? We're talking about Jimmy here. Yes, he is a typical child trying to seek access to school. The second question is, is the residence they're in now fixed, regular, and adequate? And in this situation, we're not sure if it's adequate. It doesn't really seem adequate because it's a 2-bedroom apartment, and you would have at least 4 people living there. So I would say that probably is not going to meet, not be up to code, and it's not going to be adequate for the entire family. And then the third question you have to ask is, why did they leave their former residence? Was it because of economic hardship? Was it because of disaster, something similar? In this situation, it does look like it was because of economic hardship. They moved. They couldn't afford to a security deposit to live on their own, so they had to move in with grandma. So again, we have a fixed place, a regular. It is regular, but it is not adequate, and that means it's a doubled up situation. Now, we don't know the status of this house either, so if you were looking into this, you'd want to see what is the current house like? Is it up to code? Does it have health violations? And we'd also want to know whether they are going to be staying there forever. Will Jimmy's grandma let them remain, or is it kind of up in the air? And just in case anyone was concerned about the state line issue, we're crossing from Lebanon, New Hampshire to White River Junction. For McKinney-Vento purposes, students can cross state lines and go back to the school of origin. The state line really has no significance in this situation, particularly because Lebanon and White River Junction are very close to each other. All right, so let's move on to identification and talk about the obligations of schools and maybe some strategies to identify students. All right, so first things first, all schools are required by the McKinney-Vento Act to designate a homeless liaison. This is a designated employee of the school district that will help train people at the school, help families who may identify as homeless get the necessary support services, get connected with transportation, and will coordinate with outside agencies that may also be helping a homeless family. Also in Vermont's state plan under McKinney-Vento, which is organized by the Vermont Agency of Education, the state plan describes procedures that help identify homeless children and youth, and local school districts have to comply with that state plan. And finally, if any teachers out there, or advocates, or parents, or others, find homeless children that are having difficulty accessing school, they can use the form below at the link below to refer students to their homeless liaison. This is really one of the most difficult parts of the McKinney-Vento Act. Identifying homeless students isn't easy because people typically don't want to talk about it. They don't want to have it brought up with school officials, particularly in small towns. But there are options for your school district if you're interested in trying to make it easier for homeless families to be identified so that they can get the necessary supports. One option would be to ask your school district to update enrollment forms. Make sure that the enrollment form doesn't just ask about living in a local apartment or a local home, but asks about different kinds of situations. Also, see if if you have a residency form and a guardianship form. Make sure that there are other options for families that aren't necessarily in the typical situation of, yes, I rent an apartment, or yes, this is I am the legal guardian for this child. There are many situations where this comes up, and we'll discuss it a little bit further. And finally, training staff to recognize the signs of students who may be experiencing homelessness. It's understandable that that people may not want to talk about this, but there are ways to recognize it. So when people don't want to give a current address, or don't have school records with them, don't have medical records, can't show immunizations, these may all be signs that students are experiencing homelessness and that they may be eligible for McKinney-Vento services. All right, so let's talk also now about enrollment. The number one thing to get across to everyone is that school's obligation when it comes to homeless students is to enroll first and ask questions later. The McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act mandates immediate enrollment. That is, even if there is no immunization records available, even if the family doesn't have school records, if they don't have a current address, anything like that, the mantra is enroll first and ask questions later. Just have a quick question here from someone. How many students in Vermont are being served under this act? I believe currently in Vermont there are over 1,200 students who were identified. Again, that was a 30% rise from the year before, and many more probably need the services. So to move forward, we're on school of origin versus local attendance area. The Act also gives students who are homeless the option, if it's in their best interest and if it's feasible, to attend their school of origin, even if they've had to move outside of that school's district. They can also, if they so choose, and if it makes sense, attend the local area school where they are now residing. And this is an important question because residency is a question that schools care about a lot. The school of origin in this situation is defined as the school that the child or youth attended when permanently housed, or the school in which they were last enrolled. And the local attendance area school is defined as any public school that non-homeless students in the area would be able to attend. So also it's important to note the definition of enrollment in this situation. Enrollment doesn't just mean they can be enrolled and then we'll figure it out, or their name is put in the enrollment numbers, but they're not actually attending. Enrollment for McKinney-Vento purposes is stated in the Act as full participation in classes and school activities. So that means that when a student arrives, they need to immediately be enrolled in school as soon as it is practical. So not just tutoring only for a short time, and they can't be excluded from sports or extracurricular activities. And finally, the Act, with regard to enrollment, requires districts to develop, review, and revise their policies to remove any barriers to enrollment. That would mean assisting students in acclimating to the new environment, assisting families in retrieving records, setting up transportation, and changing around those guardianship and residence forms to make sure that homeless families can easily access school. Now, when there's problems, which can happen, when a school doesn't want to enroll a student because for one reason or another, it doesn't believe that the student belongs there, or that it may not be feasible for that student to go to the school when they're homeless, there is a dispute resolution process laid out in the Act, and we'll talk about that in a second. The most important aspect of deciding who is eligible for McKinney-Vento standards, which is decided with the homeless liaison for the district, we go by a best interest standard. So that means when we're talking about where a student can enroll, we don't just look at what the school thinks is best, but we look at the age of the student, we look at personal safety issues, we think about the length of the anticipated stay in the current residence or current district. We look at how long it would take to transport them from where they currently are to their school of origin. We think about how much time is remaining in the school year, and if they were receiving special services at their former school, are those services available at the current school or in the local area? Or will it be very important for them to maintain that same continuity of service at the former school? And we also, the Act strongly prioritizes the wishes of the guardian in which school that the student should attend. So if anyone disagrees about where the student should be enrolled, the first thing to remember, again, is enroll first, ask questions later. So even if there is a dispute, and we're going to go through the dispute resolution process, the student will be continuously enrolled wherever the guardian requests it, and they will be enrolled until the appeal process is completed. So we'll go through that process now. And this process is laid out by the Vermont Agency of Education on their website, which I'll give a link at the end of this webinar. It lays out this entire process. First, the homeless liaison will administer enrollment dispute resolution. They will, talk to the family. Maybe there will be an advocate present, and see if they fit the criteria for receiving services under McKinney-Vento. The school, if they disagree with what the parent is requesting or the guardian is requesting, the school must provide an enrollment decision in writing, and they also must provide just a sheet about the parent's rights or the guardian's rights under McKinney-Vento. The student must be enrolled, as I said, in the district sought by the parent, or if it's an unaccompanied youth, by the youth until dispute resolution is complete. And then the parent or the youth or the guardian or whoever has care of the child currently may appeal if the school disagrees to the local school board or supervisory union. Finally, after the school board or supervisory union makes a decision, either party can appeal to the Secretary of Education, and the Agency of Education will do an investigation and will have the final say in that case. If a parent or a guardian or someone who has care of a child still did not like the school's decision or the secretary's decision, there is also an option to go to court. So just some common types of disputes. Many of these I've seen so far in my time at Vermont Legal Aid. The one I understand the most, and the one that really will come up the most, I think, will be about residency. And this is really an issue of schools care a lot that the students attending their schools come from families that are living in their district. Obviously, we're thinking about taxpayers, and we're concerned that we have these district lines that do mean something with school. But for homeless families, this is a little bit different. There can be some confusion over, well, we just moved here. Are we residents? Does that mean we have residency? I don't have a license that says I live in this town. I don't have any identification. I haven't changed my mailing address yet. That, for McKinney-Vento purposes, does not matter. A student who moves to a new town because of economic hardship, wherever they may be living, whether it's in a car or doubled up with family members, is eligible to attend the local attendance area, just like any other student living in that area. There's also some questions that come up around guardianship. Are you the legal guardian? Do you have custody of the child? And that can be also confusing for schools because they don't want to enroll someone who may not be a resident of the town and may not be in the care of someone that they should be in the care of. But in many circumstances, McKinney-Vento will apply, and we'll discuss that a little bit further, even if the guardian does not have legal custody. We can also, I've also had cases of unaccompanied homeless youth. Many times this is around youth who are 18 and over, maybe on their own, may have aged out of foster care, and are now trying to access school, and they don't have a guardian. Can they enroll themselves? Where are they living? These kind of questions can come up and can be very confusing when people are unfamiliar with the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. And then also, how long is someone technically homeless for? Can it be? And the real answer is that the McKinney-Vento Act does not have a limit on how long someone can be qualified as homeless for. So they may be staying with relatives for a year and still qualify for services under McKinney-Vento. We have a question here. That the whole process sounds a little complicated for families and maybe embarrassing for those who are experiencing homelessness. And as a practical matter, we're looking for how can family self-esteem be respected during the application of this law. I think, it's just important that advocates connect with homeless liaisons and make sure that the process is made easy. That's the job of the homeless liaison, to make the process easy for families, to not embarrass them, to not make it complicated for them. And typically the dispute process won't ever happen because families will have assistance. But for families that don't have assistance from shelter workers or case managers or coordinators, it can be difficult, and it is important that people have access to these rights so that their kids are not excluded from school. So we're going to go to question 2. We have a few more questions. I want to see where people's understanding is after some more explanation of the process. So I'll start reading it, and then we'll get your answers. Daniel is 16, and he recently dropped out of school. Over the summer, his family lost their house in Stowe to foreclosure. The family packed up a family camper and drove to Burlington to be closer to employment opportunities. They're currently camped in the woods in North Beach on Lake Champlain. Daniel has decided to go back to school in September. Where can he attend? So I'll give you some time to answer these questions. And that would be A, Burlington, B, Stowe, C, either, or D, neither? Okay, so let's see where we are. Now I'm going to admit, I think this one's a tough one. I think it's pretty complex, and so we'll go through it. I think it's clear our first question's answered. Daniel is still a child or youth, even though he's dropped out of school. He hasn't graduated, so he will qualify under that category. Is his living circumstance fixed, regular, and adequate? I think clearly the answer is no in that situation. He's living in a camper. It's not fixed. And then, is this because of economic hardship? Yes. The family is homeless, foreclosed, and they were forced to move. The reason this is difficult is because we're not sure where the school of origin is. So I'm going to say anyone who answered A may be correct, and anyone who answered C may also be correct. So it's a bit of a trick question here. I actually think that the answer would be A, Burlington, but people, I think, could disagree about this. Stowe is no longer his school of origin if he's dropped out, even though he was last enrolled there. Dropping out does disenroll you from the school district, and then he moved. So it's a little bit more complicated of a question. Nevertheless, I would say, Daniel, if the family wanted to go back to Stowe, if he wanted to go back to Stowe High School, he should try to, and should try to get services on McKinney-Vento. Sometimes just asking will be enough, and you won't have to go through a difficult dispute resolution process. He may not have a legal right to enrollment, and they may not provide transportation, so that's something to consider when working with families. We have to be practical about this. However, the school may do it, so it's worth asking always. But still, finally thinking about the best interest standard, Stowe High School would be an hour away or so. He didn't leave in the middle of the school year. He'd be starting a new school year fresh, so there's some complicated situations, but thank you for bearing with me on this kind of trick question. All right, so let's do one more of these. Hopefully this one's a little bit clearer. Nicole's 13. She lives in a 2-bedroom apartment with her mom in Montpelier. Before leaving for vacation in Bermuda, Nicole's mom dropped Nicole off at Grandma's 3-bedroom house in Williamstown. Later that week, Mom called and said she wasn't coming back to Vermont. Mom had a friend pack up her stuff at the apartment and ship her stuff to Bermuda and left Nicole with Grandma. Nicole wants to keep attending school in Montpelier. Can she do that? And which school can she attend under McKinney-Vento? We'll give you 30 seconds to answer. It would be A, Montpelier, B, Williamstown, C, either, or D, neither. I think we had a little mix-up with the question. We'll put the answers up in just a second. Okay, the right answers should be available now. Which school can Nicole attend? Give it a few more seconds. I'll read the scenario one more time just quickly. Nicole is 13. She lives in a 2-bedroom apartment with her mom in Montpelier. Before leaving for vacation in Bermuda, Nicole's mom dropped Nicole off with Grandma at Grandma's 3-bedroom house in Williamstown. Later that week, Mom called and said she wasn't coming back. Mom was going to stay in Bermuda. She asked a friend to pack up her apartment and ship her stuff to Bermuda. Nicole wants to keep attending school in Montpelier. Which school can she attend? Okay. So this one's a little difficult too. I'm going to go, I think the answer is B, Williamstown. Well, let's go through the process to see if we can figure this out. Nicole is a child. She qualifies, and she may even be an unaccompanied youth in this situation. Is her current residence fixed, regular, and adequate? I would say yes. It sounds like she lives in a 3-bedroom house. We don't know for sure, but based on the question, it sounds like it is fixed, regular, and adequate. Is Nicole or her mom, are they homeless? I mean, that's the real question here, bottom line question, and the answer currently is no. And did they have to move because of economic hardship? Nicole's mom, decided to go to Bermuda on vacation and didn't want to come back. I wouldn't say that it's economic hardship that forced them into this situation. So in this situation, again, the answer is B, Williamstown, but I can understand if there was some difficulty with this one. But that goes to show that McKinney-Vento does not always apply. Now, there is some nuance here, that Montpelier may let Nicole come back to Montpelier or stay in Montpelier High School. They may not provide transportation, though. They may not provide special services under McKinney-Vento. She may not be eligible for those. Again, also, if Nicole moved, though, in with a friend in Montpelier, she could stay in Montpelier under McKinney-Vento or residency statute because she would technically be an unaccompanied homeless youth. And she would be staying in Montpelier, so she would be a resident. Okay, so we have just a few more slides here I want to go through quickly. We've talked a lot about residency, so I think I just want to give people a quick overview of the Vermont residency statute, and these are the most important parts, not the whole statute. And it's typically around guardianship. Questions come up about when is a student a resident, and it does depend on who they're with sometimes. Legal residence of a child is really where the parents reside. And if the parents are living apart, residency, as long as the parents are in Vermont, is where either parent resides. But if a parent with sole custody, it's legal or physical custody, lives outside of the state, the student would not be a Vermont resident even if the other parent did live in Vermont. Now, they won't be a resident under the residency statute, but they may qualify to attend school here under McKinney-Vento. That's important to remember. Students who are 18 and over are residents wherever they reside. They're usually a majority. Children of homeless parents are residents where they temporarily reside, wherever the child resides. So even if the homeless parents live somewhere else, in a different town or in a different state, if they are homeless, then the child resides with a friend or relatives or anyone else, the residency is where they reside. And what's important to remember is that there are also criminal fraud penalties for making false residency claims. So this is where some questions come up around McKinney-Vento, and it's important to, if families are concerned about this, it is important to contact legal aid or available legal resources. So I'll just go through quickly, the kind of process of action that comes up typically around residency, or this is actually a good example of guardianship questions that have come up around McKinney-Vento. This isn't a question and answer, but just something we can go over. I'll read it. Jennifer has been living with her father in Newport. Jennifer does not know where her mother is. Jennifer's school finds out that her father does not have legal custody and doesn't want to keep her enrolled because they're wary of the legal situation that they may put themselves in. Jennifer's father believes she should be enrolled and requests enrollment dispute resolution under McKinney-Vento. Now, what should the schools consider in this situation? We want to look at how old is Jennifer. How important is it that she is kept in her regular school? Can her mother actually be located? If not, maybe she's an unaccompanied youth. And if we don't know where her mother is, it's possible she could be covered by McKinney-Vento. What is the current housing situation for Jennifer? She is an unaccompanied youth. Is her current residence fixed, regular, and adequate? If not, then she would qualify. She may qualify for McKinney-Vento services. And if the father's trying to change, modify the child custody order, that should be something that the school would want to know about and maybe wait to change enrollment status until that is completed. All right, so we're going to talk just a little bit. We have transportation obligations, special ed and early ed to go, and then we'll be done. Transportation obligations. McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act requires that schools provide or arrange transportation to and from the school of origin when it's in the child's best interest. Important thing to remember here is that parents must request transportation to be provided. So this would be at the request of parents if it's necessary. But nevertheless, schools must find a way to provide transportation, and we'll go through some options of how to do that in a minute. Schools must inform families that transportation options are available under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, and that students, if they are outside the district of origin and want to go back to their school of origin, both schools, the school district of origin and the school district of the local attendance area, will split the cost of that transportation if they can't work something else out, another different arrangement. And finally, whatever transportation is provided to the student, whether it's in the local attendance area or back to the school of origin, must be at least equal to what is offered to other students in the local area. So if other students get the bus, there's a local school bus, they must, the homeless student must also be given at least a school bus as part of the transportation options. All right, so we have one more question here. This is about transportation. And I'll read it out, and then you can answer. Omar is a high school sophomore. Well, it sounds like you may not be able to answer, but we'll go through it anyway, and we can discuss how we got to that answer. I'll read it out loud. Omar is a high school sophomore. His family lost their house in Waterbury during Tropical Storm Irene. They moved to Williston to stay with friends. Omar's school of origin, which would be Harwood Union, verifies that the family is currently homeless and is eligible for assistance under McKinney-Vento. The school also determines that staying at Harwood Union is in Omar's best interest. Does Harwood have a transportation obligation, and if so, for what? So in the questions, the answers suggested are A, yes, Harwood has to pay 100% of the cost. B, yes, they have an obligation, but split the costs with the school in Williston. C, no, school for Williston, Essex would pay 100% of the transportation costs. Or D, no, neither school has a transportation obligation. Someone made me aware I may be wrong. It may be CB and not Essex for Williston. I'm not sure. But in any case, the answer is B. The schools would split the cost 50-50 or try to work out some other arrangement to provide transportation. And just a few strategies that schools could employ or that parents and advocates could suggest. One of the things that schools can do to arrange transportation is collaborate with other school districts. So if there are different busing options available in different school districts, they could try to coordinate that to make sure that the student could access the school of origin. Also, collaborating with the community. School homeless liaisons could talk to local transportation authorities and try to make sure that local buses or taxi services are available at the areas where homeless students are most likely to be. So maybe at emergency shelter locations or close by at least. And finally, schools can collaborate with parents. They can reimburse parents for gas if they're paying. They can offer parents bus passes and maps and anything that would help a family access school and make transportation, prevent transportation from being a barrier. All right, it's important to note that, we discussed this earlier, full participation in all classes and extracurricular activities is required, and that's what enrollment means in terms of McKinney-Vento. So just quickly, I want to go through, what does full participation mean really? And it means in anything that is school-sponsored or the school's involved with. So that's athletics, extracurriculars, field trips. The important thing about this is that this could mean that schools must provide funds for those field trips for students who are qualified for McKinney-Vento services. They may have to forego the fees so that these students can access sports. And it's important to ask about that and bring it up. Again, this may not happen without requests from the family. Full participation also means that students will receive comparable services. So if they were receiving special education services, or if gifted and talented services are available, any school nutrition or school meals program that is available at the school, students qualified for McKinney-Vento services must be also given comparable services that other students receive in that school district. Students qualified for McKinney-Vento also are automatically eligible for free and reduced meal programs, whatever is provided in the district. And students who are qualified for McKinney-Vento cannot be disciplined from school because they're homeless. Now, this is kind of an unlikely situation, but really what it means is that if a student who is homeless is late or absent for some reason due to homelessness, the school district can't discipline the student for that lateness or for being absent. All right, just a few more here. McKinney-Vento and special education law. There are some important updates to special education law that kind of make it pair well with McKinney-Vento. And that's because homeless students with disabilities have even more barriers to accessing their education. Sometimes homelessness can cause a lack of timely assessment and diagnosis of disabilities. The continuity of special education services will be interrupted, and schools may not get current records, current IEP plans or evaluation reports because of the student's mobility. Also, the IDEA, that's the law that federal special education law for students with disabilities, now uses the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness. So that's a child, an unaccompanied youth, a migratory child that lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. Also, the IDEA expands the definition of a parent who can be involved in the IEP process. It's not just a biological parent, but also adoptive parents, foster guardians, surrogate parents, legal guardians, and also any individuals acting in place of a parent that live with the child. So that could be grandma, step-parents, and the like. There are similar child find requirements in McKinney-Vento as there are in special education law. Schools are obligated to find kids that have disabilities, but also the child find requirements of the IDEA require identification and evaluation of homeless children with disabilities. The IDEA also states specifically that it's the same time frame whether a student is moving because they're homeless to a new school district. You can't go more than 60 days to do an evaluation and report it out. And then, the IDEA also requires immediate free access to public education with comparable services for students, for homeless students with disabilities. All right, last slide here. I have gotten some questions recently about McKinney-Vento and early education. How does it apply? And there are also more barriers here. Young families may be more mobile, particularly young homeless families. They may lack documents needed to enroll in early childhood programs, which can be more than the typical public education program. For K-12, they may have less access to transportation. There may not be as many programs, and there's a lack of awareness about homeless issues among early childhood providers, or there may be. The main point is that homeless children are entitled to equal access to preschool, to public preschool, and they're automatically eligible for Title I preschools. But this only really applies to public preschools. It would not apply to private early education programs. But homeless liaisons in the school district that has a public preschool must still identify and seek to ensure that preschool-age children experiencing homelessness are provided comparable services to non-homeless children. That means special education, that means transportation. However, public programs don't have to exceed legal capacity limits, but federal guidance does suggest that these programs should prioritize homeless children if they have wait lists, and should still assist homeless children in accessing early childhood programs because of the long-term effects on children of homelessness, particularly around education. All right. So I think we're going to, I just want to here are some resources you can access: the Vermont Agency of Education website, Vermont Legal Aid, the National Center for Homeless Education, and the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth. All of these are great resources, particularly the National Center for Homeless Education. A lot of the information in this webinar was given from all of their resources, which are excellent. And finally, I want to see if we have any questions. I have a couple here, and we'll go through them in just a couple of minutes. First is, does an educational surrogate need to be assigned by the Agency of Education for students with IEPs? Typically, my understanding of special education law is that an educational surrogate is necessary for for a student who is in state custody. Usually the educational surrogate will be a guardian ad litem, or it will be the student's biological parent. They do that to ensure that there's impartiality and involvement from non-state actors in that process. Another question here. In your opinion, how is Vermont doing with regard to implementing this act in comparison to other states? Better than most? I would say that schools in Vermont do a very good job of implementing this act. I think most of the situations are rather clear, and the act came about in the early 1980s, so it's been around for a long time, and schools are very aware of it. However, I think the situations I mentioned, where residency is in question, where guardianship is in question, where we have homeless youth, particularly those who are over 18 or who are under 18 without a legal guardian, schools may be more hesitant to enroll those students, may not be really aware of their obligations around those students. The obligations, as I said, the main mantra is enroll first, ask questions later. Are there any other questions? All right, well, I want to thank everyone for being involved with the webinar today. Thank you very much for joining us. This webinar will be archived on Vermont Family Network's website, along with many other previously recorded webinars. Be sure to visit Vermont Family Network's website at www.vermontfamilynetwork.org for a complete list of upcoming webinars, workshops, and support groups. Thanks again, and have a great day. If you have any further questions or comments, please feel free to email me at jdiaz@vtlegalaid.org.